That's the first time we've shown that video in public. I hope it was an all right way to start, so thank you. Before we do anything else, could we say a very large Oregon welcome to Akhil Reed Amar. Welcome. Thank you for being here. Thanks for coming in on a Monday night. Thanks to folks in LeGrand at HQ who are in a group watching there. Thanks to folks in Clatskanie at the Cultural Center. Thanks to folks in Salem at Willamette University, all joining you from different places and here to think some about equality and democracy and to kick off a series on the theme Beyond 250, which Oregon Humanities is focusing on for the coming year. My name's Adam Davis. I want to say a couple quick thanks, ask you a couple questions to give Akhil a sense of the room, and then we're going to jump in. I should say, for people that arrived in the last half hour, you missed a pretty incredible scene from 5:30 to 6:30 or so, which was, I don't know, maybe 60 students from several different schools asking Akhil questions that were, the questions were much more learned than any answers I could give, and it was incredible to see the energy in the room and already to know what we're in for tonight. So exciting evening already, and hopefully continues to get more robust as we go. Thank you to the Susan Hammer Fund of the Oregon Community Foundation, to the Standard, to the Oregon Cultural Trust, and to the National Endowment for the Humanities, such as it is in its current state. Thank you to all those organizations. Thanks to so many of you who support the work that Oregon Humanities and other cultural organizations are doing. Thanks to the Oregon Law Foundation and the Civics Learning Project for doing so much to get students here and to get students engaged and to work on the future. Thank you. In just a moment, we're going to start talking. I'll ask Akhil questions for a chunk of time. Then we have a microphone over here, and we'll also take questions in, online. So we'll add those questions to the mix. To help Akhil get a sense of the room, can you make some noise if this is your first Oregon Humanities Consider This program? And if you are a returner, could you make a little noise? We are glad you're all here. Hopefully you will all be returners. Second question, and I would like you to be honest with your applause, please. If you hold it as a self-evident truth that all people are created equal, could you make a little noise? Last question. Can you make a little noise if, under pressure, you could quickly produce 3 kinds of equality that the federal government should most be committed to maintaining? Okay, so that's the room, such as it is. You have been talking about your book. You have written a book on top of many other books. You've also got podcasts going, and I don't want to start with the book. I want to start by asking you about sometime over the past few weeks when you had an experience of equality in your life, when you felt something that was related to the value of equality that's named in the Declaration and again in Lincoln's words later. Just in your daily life, small or large, that you could share with us.
Great to be with you all, and that was an amazingly robust, warm Oregon welcome, so thank you for that. I've been on the road a lot. Tonight, I'm going to leave pretty quickly after this event to take a red eye back to the East Coast, and so I've gone through a lot of TSA portals. And if you think that the only value in the Constitution is privacy, you'd want to minimize the number of these intrusions. But if you think that it's also equality, that you're given a certain comfort, actually, that they're not singling you out because you have dark skin, or a beard. So as mean as it sounds, I actually am kind of comforted by the fact that everyone else has to go through this, and they're not singling me out, and that's equality.
So not being synced. Of course, TSA, as we discussed earlier, also has some hierarchy built into it these days, often correlating to whether people are willing to spend a certain amount of money at the outset of the year, which points, I raise that just to say it points toward a question about different kinds of equality.
Yes, but I'm not maybe at the highest level of those pre-clearances, so I go through the metal detector like everyone else. Now, yes, I suppose if you're Taylor Swift and you have your own plane, it is possible that there's sort of a different system. But even then, our laws don't say, oh, you get to go through that portal because you're white, that special portal, or because you're male, or because you're firstborn in the family, because you're born straight rather than gay. So there are all sorts of inequalities in the world. But when government treats some people, exalts some, and demeans others because of the accidents of their birth, that's when we should be most, I think, troubled.
And the two accidents of birth that it feels to me like you're most talking about in Born Equal, and in a way, even earlier this evening, are related to race and gender.
Yes.
And yes, that was a good yes.
He told me to try to be Lincolnian, by which I said, I'm not tall. And he said, no, I mean terse.
I did actually say that out loud? I know I was thinking it. Thank you.
Abe had a great sense of humor, too. And
So-
you'll meet him in the book.
So as a way of, it seemed like thinking again primarily about racial equality and gender equality, and you just mentioned Abe, and you used Abe's first name.
I feel as if I know him.
But you actually use first names a few times, actually many times, and I felt like tonally, well, let me just ask it this way. Why first names? And is that also a part of your trying to get us thinking about equality?
A lot of people have disliked that feature, some of the ones that I care the most about. Other people have liked it. It's one of the more distinctive features. So I talk about 4 people more than anyone else in the book: 1 white man, 1 black man, 2 white women. There are black women, but they're not, they're cameo appearances rather than my big 4. One reason that I use first names is this is an era that I'm talking about in which women rise to the surface. They become central to discourse. And if I use last names, because some of these women have spouses, it's a little bit tricky when I actually use their last name, because sometimes I'm also talking about their spouses. Their last name is also their father's name, even their maiden name, and not their mother's name. So it can be a little confusing. It can be very gendered. Oh, slaves were known by their first name, and one of my 4 was born a slave. So in some ways it felt more equal to use first names, less patriarchal. In his lifetime, it's a period in which there was more informality. No one ever called Washington George, or Jefferson Tom or Thomas, but I promise you they talked all the time about Honest Abe Lincoln, Uncle Abe Lincoln. They did.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting thinking about what you just said about the 4 people you most focused on. And I know when just a few minutes ago asking folks here about the second question, really, about the truths we hold to be self-evident. And I changed a word from
You did.
all men to all people.
And someone else in my book changed that word too. So the book begins, the first two sentences actually are the following. The words resound through the ages. Quote, 77 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. That's Lincoln at Gettysburg, of course. He's speaking in 1863. If you deduct 87 years, that's 77 years, that's 1776. If you do the math, he's talking about the Declaration of Independence, and he thinks the central proposition is all men are created equal, and he's quoting. He's one of my four characters. Another one of my four characters is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and I call her Elizabeth in part to distinguish her from her husband, Henry Brewster Stanton, who's also a very important figure, an abolitionist. And at a place called Seneca Falls in 1848, she's riffing on the Declaration, as Lincoln will in 1863. But here's what she says in a thing called the Declaration of Sentiments. Rhymes with Declaration of Independence. It's the main document that emerges from the Seneca Falls Convention of 1848, the world's first women's rights convention, and it has the following language. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, and there are men and women at Seneca Falls, and one of the men at Seneca Falls is actually a third major character of mine. His name is Frederick Douglass, and he's born a slave. He's America's most famous black man. His father was actually white. He's biracial. His first wife is black. When she dies, his second wife is white. But he very much believes actually not just in racial equality, but female equality as well. So yes, you change it to all people are created equal, and you're following in a tradition that Elizabeth helped launch. I haven't told you yet about my fourth character, but I've already told you 3 of the 4 big characters in the book are Abe, Lincoln, Frederick, Douglass, and Elizabeth, Cady Stanton.
So you just referred to Lincoln's specific words, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. And I've been trying to get my head around what, I feel like proposition is doing some work.
Yes.
And it feels quite different from a description.
Yes.
I like when you say yes like that. It makes me think so what are you thinking?
I'm thinking that Lincoln actually, who has less than a year of classroom education in his life, thinks very mathematically. He becomes Abraham Lincoln by reading books and reading newspapers. And that's why I'm so delighted that many of you are getting books in your hands. And some of his favorite books are great works of fiction, Aesop's Fables, for example. Oh, he loves Shakespeare, but he also loves Euclid. He's very logical, he's very analytical, and he's very interested in effect, propositions. And one of the reasons he's so funny, and he is funny, is logic can sometimes be funny because human beings aren't always logical, and when you point out the illogic, it's hilarious.
I mean, there's something hilarious about saying it's self-evidently true that all men are created equal.
Indeed, in the middle of one chapter, I give you, when I'm describing the Lincoln-Douglas debates, 10 different ways in the middle of the 1900s, in the middle of the 1800s, the 19th century, 10 different ways in which those 5 words are construed, and 1 or 2 of them are, it's a self-evident lie. It's not true. And another one is, oh, that doesn't apply to black people. It's only about white people. There are all sorts of different riffs on those 5 words. We are still today trying to think about the entailments, the scope and the limits of those 5 words. All men are created equal, or as you paraphrased it, all persons are created equal. All people are created equal.
So as you understand it, what are the most important ways that the federal government is trying to live into making us or helping us be equal?
So at the center of this book are 4 amendments. I call them Lincolnian amendments. This is the 2nd volume in a 3-volume series trying to tell us the story of us, tell Americans the story of America. The first volume is the words that made us. It's a pun, the words that made the United States, us, U.S., how we become we the people. And that's how these separate colonies come together. That's 1760 to 1840, the first 40 years. This is the middle volume, and the big idea of the period 1840 to 1920 is, in my view, a riff on all men are created equal. And the riff is an idea widening and deepening of birth equality. We're all born equal, which is a riff on created equal. And Lincoln is saying this at Gettysburg, but at Gettysburg, he's talking about his interpretation of the Declaration of Independence, which is from 1776, 7 years before 1863. But soon, the Constitution itself, because he's not talking about the Constitution, he's talking about the Declaration. He's not talking about 1787, 88, he's not which is the Constitution. He's not talking about the Bill of Rights, which is 1789, 90, 91. He's talking about the Declaration, all men are created equal. But shortly after Gettysburg, we will get a series of amendments, I call them Lincolnian amendments, codifying the birth equality proposition, idea, the born equal idea. The 13th Amendment, ending slavery everywhere, immediately, and without a cent of compensation, wow, that's radical, affirms that we're all born equally free. No one's born a slave, no one's born a master. That was Lincoln's original idea of birth equality, born equal in life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But Lincoln grows, the country grows. The 14th Amendment is going to be actually a more expansive idea in some ways and a more limited idea in other ways. It's no longer universal. All men are created equal is around the world, everywhere, Euclidean, again, logical. No one in the world should be born a slave. No one should be born a master. We're all born equal. But now the 14th Amendment is going to be different. It's going to be about Americans and people who are born in America, not necessarily in Canada or in France or anyone else, but people born in America under the American flag are born equal citizens, more than freedom, citizens with civil rights of speech, press, petition, property, and religion, and the like. And they're born equal, whether they're born citizens with equal civil rights, whether they're born black or white, or male or female. It's not just about race. If we're just about race, they could have used the word race in the amendment, and they didn't. So that's the 14th Amendment. We go from born equally free to born equally, if you're an American citizen. The 15th Amendment is going to say, oh, whether you're born white or black, you should be allowed to vote equally. Voting isn't a civil right. It's what they called a political right. So it's above and beyond speech, press, religion. Only some people are voters. A 2-year-old could be a citizen, but a 2-year-old isn't a voter. Women were citizens, white women, but they weren't voters. And so that's true even after the 15th Amendment. 15th Amendment says you're born equally a voter whether you're born black or white. Oh, but what about women? That's why we're going to need eventually a 19th Amendment. 50 years later, that's the end of the book, the 19th Amendment saying whether you're born male or female, you are born an equal future voter. So the conventional view is there's sort of 3 Reconstruction amendments, 13, 14, 15, after the Civil War. I say that it's really a tetralogy. Really there are 4 key Lincolnian amendments, and the 19th is very much a Lincoln-inspired amendment, just as are the 13th, 14th, and the 15th, even though the 19th actually finally gets added to the Constitution half a century later.
So that talk about amendments somehow has me thinking that amendment has come to feel like a quaint word. I think in the book you talk about there being these periods of drought.
Yes.
When amendments are concerned, and now it feels a little bit like famine, and it's hard even to imagine. It's hard even to imagine that there might be another amendment or other amendments. And I guess I want to ask you, is that because the hard work has been done, the work that the amendments needed to do, or why the drought persisting?
So the droughts can last for a long time. It can feel like the Sahara. So there's a burst of energy at the founding, and we get a constitution and 10 amendments almost immediately thereafter that we call the Bill of Rights, and 2 more early on, the 11th and the 12th. The 12th is ratified in about 1804 or so. We're not going to get the next amendment for 60 plus years. Okay, so that's a long drought. But then we get 13, 14, 15 in a bunch, a monsoon, a drought, and then drench. I know you never get rain here, but you know. And then nothing really for another long period of time between 1870 and 1910. Nothing, and then a whole spurt, once again, a monsoon, 16th Amendment, that's about income tax, direct election of senators, the 17th Amendment, 18th Amendment, prohibition, 19th Amendment is woman suffrage. So, and then really, with small exceptions, you don't have a major spurt until the 1960s. And it goes until around 1970 or so, and then there's been one little exception that I'll gloss over, but we're due for perhaps another drench, but we've gone through 50-year periods before without amendments. Now, why don't we have amendments right now? I think now might not be the best time for an amendment, just because we're deeply and closely divided. And half of the country, or almost half, wants to pull us in one direction, and the other half in the other direction. And until a little bit more consensus emerges, it might not be the most propitious time for amendment. So, yeah, it could be a lot better, but it could be a lot worse. And so maybe at least for now, we stay with what we've got. But this generation, when it actually comes of age, is going to need to decide what, if any, changes need to be made. And I want them to learn about previous generations that made change, that remade the Constitution. That's the subtitle of this book, Remaking the Constitution. How are you going to do that if you don't know how it was initially made, the words that made us in the founding period, and how a later generation remade it? How are you going to think about what things you want to add and how you would go about adding them if you don't know that story?
You've spent so much time immersed in this story, and what you just said about we may be due for more amendments down the road. What do you think we're due for? Can I ask you? Like, what in your? I know that there are young people here who are going to have ideas and do have ideas, but having just immersed yourself so deeply in ideas of equality and how we moved closer to ideals, what's still in front of us to take care of?
So there are some people today that want to take away birthright citizenship from those of us who were not children of citizens when we were born. I myself, when I'm born under the U.S. flag on American soil in Ann Arbor, Michigan, my parents are not citizens. They happen to have been here legally, but Constitution, they were doctors saving American lives, invited by the American government, but they weren't citizens. They weren't green card holders, but I'm still a citizen. That's what the 14th Amendment says, and you're going to learn about it in this book. Some people want to take that away by interpretation. I don't think actually their interpretation is very plausible, but fine. So we say to them, no, as of now, people who are born in the U.S., whether their parents are citizens or green card holders or even here legally, if they're born here under the flag, they're citizens. Oh, but they could say, oh, but we're surely allowed to amend the Constitution. And I say, yes, you are. But you should know why we have it in there before you change it. That's on the one side. On the other side, some folks might say, you know, here's something that's not quite fair. If someone wasn't born a citizen but became a citizen thereafter, they're not eligible to be president. And that's not very fair. The birth equality principle should be broadened, not limited by a future amendment. And so, you know, that's possible to imagine. Just if I can hear some noise, I can't see anyone. Is there anyone here who wasn't born a citizen who later became a citizen? Just make some noise, please. Okay. So right now, truthfully, you're not eligible to be president, but we might amend the Constitution to make you eligible. Now I'll blow your mind. That such an amendment was actually proposed in this century, in my lifetime, by a very serious senator, and the senator was a Republican. And I testified on behalf of that amendment. The senator wasn't just a Republican, but the longest serving Republican senator in U.S. history at that point. His name was Orrin Hatch from Utah. He was a friend of Mitt Romney's, who was a friend of David Nirenberg's, who's right here in the front row. So, and I could imagine Republicans going forward saying, we are going to be restrictive in some ways, but we're going to actually open the door in other ways. If you come to America legally and you've been here a long time and played by the rules, you should be eligibly present. But that will require a constitutional amendment. I could imagine such an amendment passing.
I guess as I think about the possibility of an amendment passing, it seems like there would be the need for some sort of large cultural shift, which makes me want to ask you two questions. One is about the fourth main character in your book, who we haven't spoken about yet, Harriet Beecher Stowe, who it seems like culture, not legislation, is where Harriet was working. So I want to ask you both about Harriet Beecher Stowe and about your understanding of the relationship between cultural shifts and shifts in the law.
So America's most successful by sales novel is Uncle Tom's Cabin. It sells more copies than any other book of the century, any American book of the century, more than Huck Finn, Tom Sawyer, Moby Dick, Scarlet Letter. So that's one thing. Oh, and it's written by a woman. Wow. Everyone, millions of people in America and around the world are actually reading this book, and they know that the author is a woman and a mother. She's not writing under a pseudonym. This year is the 250th anniversary of Jane Austen's birth. I'm a huge Jane Austen fan. She's discussed in the book, but Jane does not, oh yeah, Jane, as if, you know, I'm on a first name basis with Jane too. Jane doesn't write as Jane Austen. She writes as a lady. And the Bronte sisters write under male pseudonyms, and George Sand does, and George Eliot does, and Louisa May Alcott writes under an androgynous pseudonym. Harriet writes as a woman, as a mother. She writes about women, slave mothers, and she's and so I say she's America's first female superstar. And in volume 1, women are at the periphery. Abigail Adams is interesting, but not everyone is talking about her. Harriet Beecher Stowe is the first woman in American history that everyone is talking about simultaneously. So before Taylor Swift, before Beyonce, before Hillary Rodham Clinton or Kamala Harris or even Eleanor Roosevelt, there is Harriet. And yes, she's not a politician, she's a cultural figure, but she's writing very much about political issues, the most political issue imaginable, slavery, and she's reminding her audience, slavery isn't just a labor system, and it's not just about men in the field, it's about women who are being raped as women, who are being made wet nurses against their will and breeders against their will as women, who are having babies ripped from their embrace, and they feel it especially as women, and the world will never be the same. Yes, you're right. The people that are the architects of the future aren't just the politicians, they're also the poets and the novelists. Yes, they are, and Harriet reminds us of that, absolutely. And I think she's taught in the wrong part of the curriculum because she is, an artful novelist, but just purely as a novelist, I think I prefer Jane Austen. I just like her style a little bit better, but Jane Austen, I actually might prefer Dickens. I like his plots, exceedingly, but they don't end slavery, and she does. So she needs to be taught in history departments and political science departments and not just literary departments, in the same way that Lincoln actually is rather poetic, but you might think actually Keats is a better poet, or you might like Byron or what have you, but they don't end slavery the way he does.
So the contemporary cultural figures you just named, there was laughter and recognition of their names. It's not clear. I mean, first of all, they mostly skew left politically. Yet it feels like in some ways we're moving right. So again, I think I want to ask a version of the question about the relationship between culture and legislation.
Complex relationship. So are all the female icons today, not all, you didn't say all. Yeah, Hollywood is coded left, I think, and Hollywood is a big part of our culture. So is reality TV a big part of our culture. And there was a reality TV star who actually got himself elected president twice and is talking about a third run. So culture is interesting and complex. But I agree with you totally, my friend, that you can't ignore culture, and that slavery especially. And here's another thing you can't ignore that we should talk about. So you say culture. Let me say it in a different way. Harriet is very religious. You can't ignore religion. And you may think about, many of you, a religious right today, but I'm telling you a story, since you're talking about right and left, about a religious left in America that was huge. They are the abolitionists, and they are very much moved by their sense of the Almighty. I introduced you early on to a woman named Lucretia Mott. She's a Quakeress, and her anti-slavery ideas are coming very strongly. She's a female Quaker minister from a strong spiritual tradition, a religious tradition. Harriet is the daughter of a preacher, the sister of 7 preachers, one of whom will be her father's Lyman Beecher. One of her brothers, her most famous brother, Henry Ward Beecher, is the most prominent clergyman in America. He'd be like Billy Graham in the middle of the 20th century. And those of you who watch The Crown, there's a whole episode actually about Billy Graham, an American evangelical in Britain. And Henry Ward Beecher will be the man, is the man who invites Abraham Lincoln to come east, to come to New York and show his stuff. And that we call that the Cooper Union Address, the Cooper Institute Address, where Lincoln actually impresses what we would call the Eastern establishment and shows that he's, not just, a kind of a corn pone, jokester from the Midwest, but a really serious and impressive lawyer and thinker. So culture, yes. Religion, which is maybe its own thing, but connected to culture, yes, hugely important, even if you want to understand politics, and left and right.
And then can I ask about one other important area, which seems to be, that is when we're thinking about advances in equality, war.
Yes, huge.
So why war or major conflict as tied to jumps in equality?
Because wars drive change. They upend a lot of stuff. Because wars put a premium on, they threaten liberty, but they often expand equality because wars give opportunities for people at the bottom to basically say, you need our help now against an external enemy, and we will help you, but in exchange, we want more inclusion. So Frederick Douglass says, aha, this is our chance. This is our chance to show, that we are Americans loyal to America. There are these white people who are rebelling. They're the traitors. They're treasonous, Jefferson, Davis, and the Confederacy. This is an opportunity for black people to actually join the Union Army and win their citizenship. And he says stuff like that. And Lincoln and 200,000 blacks in blue will be the margin of victory. Some of them are former slaves. They're running away from plantations, so they're no longer supporting the slave economy. So, and they're jumping onto the other balance pan. So if you have 200,000, think just in terms of horsepower, human power, muscle power, 200,000 that were actually supporting a slave economy and freeing up white Confederates to go to the battlefield. They leave the plantations. Okay, so now those Confederate soldiers have to go back home, and then they jump onto the other plan. That's a twofer. That's a huge, a force multiplier, and Frederick Douglass understands that, and so does Lincoln, and they're working together to win the war. And Lincoln, at the end, will say, early on, he says, I don't believe in Negro citizenship even. I don't believe in Negro voting equality. Those are his words, Negro, okay? He says that in the Lincoln-Douglas debates. I think everyone is equally free, but not equally a citizen, not equally a voter. So he's early on going to, in effect, be a 13th Amendment guy, but not a 14th or a 15th. Oh, but at the end of his life, in the last speech he ever gives, he does not know his last speech. Only we do. On the White House lawn, he actually says, blacks fought for the Union. They deserve to vote in the Union. And a person is there in the audience, hearing it, only a few yards from Lincoln. Some of you are probably closer to me. I'm as close to me as this guy was to Lincoln. His name was John Wilkes Booth. And as soon as he hears Lincoln saying, I am in favor of black suffrage for black soldiers, at that moment, he says to the guy next to him, his partner in crime, we're going to kill him. And within a week, Lincoln is dead, and you might not know that story. I tell it in the book. So wars, to repeat, they accelerate all sorts of change. They're like, gasoline. They're an accelerant. And they put a premium on loyalty. They give an opportunity for people who are low to rise. Tonight, here's what you can do. There's a thing called the National Archives Founders Online. It's our tax dollars at work. It takes every letter ever written by or to the leading founding fathers, and it's digitized and word searchable. And you can array it in all sorts of ways. Here's the first letter that we have, the first one extant from Alexander Hamilton. He's 14 years old, and he writes this letter. So you can just, the first one, just author Alexander Hamilton, chronological order. And he's writing to his friend Edward Stevens, and he says, I'm stuck here in the middle of nowhere. I'm a groveling little clerk. I hate this. Oh, I have grand ambitions, you know. I would risk my life, but not my honor, you know, in order to do something great. And then here's his last sentence. He's 14 years old, you know, because he's, you know, very low born. He says, in short, Nettie, I wish there were a war. Because he understands, oh, in a war, you know, it's like the Journey song, Don't Stop Believing, paying anything to roll the dice just one more time. Because if you're on the bottom, you know, you want a spinning of the wheel. That's a revolution of the wheel of fortune. You want to roll the dice one more time because you got nothing to lose when you're on the bottom. Wars often take people on the bottom and raise them. So in the revolution, people who don't have property get to vote because they fight. In the Civil War, black men actually who fight get the vote. In World War I, women who are part of that war effort actually get the vote. That's the end of this book, and I'm telling you, it's a World War I story. And in my lifetime, David's lifetime, those who are 18, 19, and 20, who were old enough to fight in Vietnam, got a constitutional amendment saying, you know, if you're old enough to fight, you're old enough to die, you're old enough to vote on whether we should have that war in the first place. So, yes, wars often threaten liberty and expand equality.
Thank you for that. You used the phrase low-born, which rings, I think, very strange in this country now in many ways, but so does the phrase no kings. Like that feels like an anachronistic phrase in some ways. And as I was reading your book, I was thinking about why no kings? Why go to that phrase as the phrase to stand for protest right now? And in part, it feels like it's doing what you said the winners of the first 15 elections in the country, presidential elections, had to do, which was tie themselves closer to the founding.
Yes.
That's another one of those yeses.
So the founders loom very large in the American imagination, and successful politicians often connect themselves to the founders and founding stories. Abe did it. In 1863, he's talking about 1776, and he's got a particular interpretation of 1776. He says, here's the key idea: all men are created equal. Elizabeth is actually going to go back to the founders. She's going to riff on it. She's going to say it's not really all men, properly understood as all men and women are created equal. So yes, in American politics, I do believe you're likely to be more successful if you can connect yourself to the American story, and that American story does include the founders. Now, there have been these important amendments as well, and you're going to need to connect yourself not just to George Washington, in effect, but to Abe Lincoln and the amenders, the Reconstruction generation, or to Elizabeth Cady Stanton and the suffrage generation. So Barack Obama, I think, was a very successful politician, in part because he could sing the song of America. And I think Abraham Lincoln was able to do that as well. And so sometimes, though, if that's what you're trying to do, you try to fit some things into a narrative, whether it's true or not. So let me just take one person. There's a very famous cartoon, and the cartoon is King Andrew the First, because the president we've had that's probably the most similar to Trump is maybe Andrew Jackson. You know, he's got a very domineering personality. You could say a monarchical personality. He's very harsh. When he holds a grudge, he's a dueler. At the end of his life, he was asked, this is all in Volume 1, The Words That Made Us, if he had left anything undone. At the end of his life, he said, yes, I didn't hang John C. Calhoun, and I didn't shoot Henry Clay. Okay, he's got a domineering personality. But the cartoon is King, as critics, King Andrew I. But truthfully, he wasn't a king. He was actually basically born an orphan. His parents weren't particularly wealthy. The guy he's running against is much higher born, John Quincy Adams, kind of American royalty. But yes, you're going to try to say, if you don't like someone, they're like King George III. Now, our current guy actually was much higher born. He wants you to forget that, that he was born on third base. He wants you to think he hit a triple. No, he was born on third base. Okay, in a way that actually Andrew Jackson wasn't, but it's not a surprise at all that the metaphors would go all the way back to the American Revolution. And he does have a domineering personality, and he's talking about being, executive for life, and he's trolling us all by putting, posting images of him putting crowns on his head and all the rest. So he's trolling us in various ways. But just today, I read a piece in a major publication that he's, musing once again about a third term, even though the Constitution seems to say, no, you can't do that anymore.
You used the phrase a minute ago. I'm not going to follow up on the question of whether Trump will seek a third term right now. I think there are plenty of people that are going to talk about that and have been talking about it. Instead, I want to ask you about the phrase you just used, sing the song of America, when you were talking about some presidential candidates. And it feels like in some way that's what your work has been about.
And I feel it viscerally. I'm not doing it just for tactical purposes. Since we're talking about how people are born, Abe is born in the dirt. His father is barely literate. His mother dies when he's 9 years old. He has no family fortune, no family name. His family has no power base. He has less than a year's classroom education. Classroom education. I'm not talking about college. I'm just talking about in any sort of classroom in his whole life. So that's born low, but he reads and reads and reads, and he reads books and newspapers, and he improves himself, and oh my gosh. And Frederick Douglass is born even lower, if it's possible to imagine. He's born a slave, unfree. He doesn't even know the day he was born. He never knows his birthday. You know the names of the birthdays of your puppies and kittens, but he never knows that. He never knows who his father was. His father's a white man. He has some clues, some guesses, but never for sure. And he rises to meteoric heights because, again, he teaches himself to read, and he escapes slavery, and he's an astonishing reader and writer and thinker. These are low-born folk. Now let's take yours truly. So when and women, when if you're born a woman in that period, you're born with huge disadvantages in life, even if you come from a relatively well-off family, like Harriet Beecher Stowe, her father's a Yale-educated preacher, or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, whose father's one of the most wealthy people in the state of New York. But you're still born a woman, and you're at a huge disadvantage. Yours truly. When I'm born, it's true that my parents actually are doctors, but they're very impecunious doctors at the time. They're not even citizens. They're not even green card holders. Their status legally is rather precarious. We don't have a lot of resources. When my dad arrives in the United States and sees the Statue of Liberty, he has less than $100 to his name. And oh my God, I feel so damn lucky that I was born a U.S. citizen, that the Constitution, the day I was born, made me a U.S. citizen, equal to everyone else born in Ann Arbor, Michigan that day, because I was born under the American flag, the American Constitution, on American soil. So yes, I feel it very viscerally. I do sing the Song of America because I know how lucky I have been in my life to have been born an American. Mm-hmm. And not everyone was. I have 24 first cousins. And the ones who are born outside the United States, who weren't lucky enough to be born citizens, many of them want to come here. And the ones who were born here, most of them want to stay here. They don't want to go elsewhere. And so growing up, I thought, well, that's a very interesting thing, isn't it? What is it about this country? And I come to think that's special. Well, one thing, it has to be the Constitution. Maybe I should study it some more. And then when I study it some more, I think, people like Lincoln say that the cornerstone is the Declaration of Independence. Maybe I need to study it some more too.
It's interesting and also moving to hear you talk about the visceral feeling and the thought that follows about the Constitution and the Declaration. And as we start moving towards inviting questions from audience members, I guess I want to ask maybe just one or two more questions. And the first is about this, which is that the song around equality, the song around the Declaration and the Constitution, it feels like it's not in great shape. And I say that, I feel like more on the left, I think there's the sense that, what do you mean talking about equality? This country has never been about equality. So that feels to be, the song is false. And on the right, it seems to be something like, equality is not what matters most. We're interested in other things. And if you're singing about equality, you might as well be singing about socialism or something like that. So I guess I wonder what you think about the condition of the song and what continues to give it strength for you.
Yeah, I think that's an acute diagnosis. I'm left of center, but I do think many of my friends who are left of center are making a political mistake in burning flags rather than waving them. And I think they're making an historical mistake because they do not understand the true greatness of America because they haven't read my books. And the books that they have read, bluntly, many of them, I'm going to be really honest here, are crap. Howard Zinn's books are essentially false. They do not tell you about the greatness of America, and they do tell you things about America that aren't so great, but also aren't so true. So I'll give you 2 or 3 examples, because wow, that was a big thing to throw out. I've been to all these airports. You see, and every time I go into the airport, they've got 6 copies of Zinn in the bookstore, 6 copies of Zinn's book and not mine. And I'm eating my liver, okay, because here are some things that actually are true that you don't know. Okay, I can't see a show of hands, so make some noise. If you've heard of the 1619 Project, let's hear. If you've heard of the Abolition Project, not so much. 1619 is the year. If you've heard of Lord Dunmore, the Dunmore Proclamation, okay. 1619 is when slave ships reach Virginia. But there's slavery everywhere in the world way before 1619. In Asia, among Asians. In Africa, among Africans. In Europe, native tribes are enslaving other Native Americans. So 1619 is not that big a deal. Oh, slavery comes to what will become the United States. Here's a big deal, but you hear a lot about that. America is conceived in slavery. Abraham Lincoln didn't think that. He thought it was conceived in liberty and dedicated the proposition. Oh, so you can pick Lincoln or you can pick Zinn. Okay, I'm with Lincoln. Now, what is special about America? Not slavery. The whole world has slavery. And the whole world, even before America, has the idea of freeing individual slaves, emancipation, manumission, but does not have the idea, of ending slavery, abolishing slavery everywhere as a system. That idea is born in Philadelphia in 1775. The world's first abolition society. Howard Zinn didn't tell you that, did he? Okay, and he didn't tell you, and this is the first chapter, the introduction of this book, that immediately after saying all men are created equal, Ben Franklin in Pennsylvania is going to champion a constitution in what we call Independence Hall, in the same building, a constitution that begins with the words, the state constitution, because these are independent states now, all men are born equally free and independent, and that will be immediately the beginning of abolishing slavery in Pennsylvania. And John Adams, who's there in the room in July 1776, is going to preside over a Massachusetts Constitutional Convention in 1780 that begins with the words, all men are born free and equal, and immediately slavery will be abolished in Massachusetts. By the way, those are the same words that Margie Marshall used in 2005, I think, maybe it was, no, 2003, to say same-sex marriage is a constitutional right in Massachusetts, because if some people are born straight and others are born gay, they should have equal marriage rights. There is an abolition project in the world, and it begins in America at the time of the American Revolution, and it's places like Philadelphia, religious reasons, Quakers are important, and Boston, and Howard Zinn didn't tell you that, did he? Okay, and they put the Constitution to a vote up and down a continent, and that had never been done before. It's right there in front of your eyes. We, the people of the United States, do ordain and establish. We're doing something. The Athenians never put any constitution to a vote. Neither did the Spartans or the Romans or the Swiss or the Brits. Americans are the first people in the world to put a constitution to a vote, and they did so in 1787, 88, up and down a continent. And the world would never be the same. More people were allowed to vote on the U.S. Constitution than had ever been allowed to vote on anything before in human history. And yes, from today's perspective, it sucks because women aren't voting and there are property qualifications in some places and there is slavery. But you can't measure it by today. You have to measure it by the world before then, and nothing like that had ever happened in the history of the world. We give the world democracy on a continental scale and abolition, and we give women the vote way before most other regimes. So we begin an abolition project before anyone else in the world is doing it. We have much to be ashamed of, and I will tell you some of America's greatest sins, and some of the amendments have made amends for these lapses. So you have obligations as Americans. We inherit debts because we did things that weren't right. Not me personally, not you personally, but our forebears. If we're going to inherit the assets, we have to inherit the liabilities. So I'm going to tell you about the debts we owe because things were done that weren't right. But we also have much to be proud of. There is American greatness, and if we on the left don't understand that, I think we play into the hands of Trump and allies that talk about American greatness but don't know what it is. American greatness is birth equality, and we have to sing that song, wave the flag, rather than burning it. I think that's a better politics and a truer history. So it is authentic for me, this singing of the song, because I do not take for granted everything that I have as an American, because I've got cousins who don't have that, and I think, oh, there, but for the grace of God and the Constitution, go I.
I think I want to open it for questions.
Yes.
And so questions we're going to do from here at this microphone over here. Also, please, and my colleague at Oregon Humanities, Ben, is going to help adjust the mic. We're also going to take questions from folks in LeGrand and Clatskanie and Salem and wherever else you're watching. Please, we'll try to get as many as we can. Please do keep in mind that Akhil will eventually have to run to catch a plane, and so please keep your questions Lincolnian, pithy, and please lead with your name. Thank you. Before we go to the first question, can we just say one more thanks provisionally to Akhil?
Hi, my name is CM, and I'm a queer American and a queer Oregonian. And I am
and a public servant
and
also.
an elected official, actually, yes.
And thank you for
I'm
your
actually
service.
asking a question in regards to that because there was an article in, I think it was Time this week, that more trans Americans are fleeing the United States because they don't feel safe here. And I was in an elected official group for queer people where they don't feel safe even serving. And I just want to know, in your book, if you were to write a future chapter, what it would look like for queer folks in terms of looking at the states and how many anti-LGBTQ bills are being forwarded in state legislatures. What does the future look like, knowing what the Supreme Court, the composition is, and how anti-LGBTQ it is? Thank you for being here.
Thank you for that question. Thank you for your public service. So this idea of birth equality, it's a profound one. It's a contested one. We're still debating its contours. I told you at its core, the idea was that no one should be exalted or demeaned because of the accidents of their birth. Because they were born white, they shouldn't be treated way better than because they were born black. Because they were born male, they shouldn't be treated better than because they were born female. The 14th Amendment doesn't use the word race, it goes beyond race. It's a deep idea of birth equality. If you're born first in your family, you don't get by law more inheritance rights than if you're born fifth. If you're born out of wedlock, you have to be treated just as well as if you're born in wedlock. Remember, Hamilton was born out of wedlock. If you're born to citizen parents, you shouldn't be treated better than those of us born to non-citizen parents or even people whose parents weren't here legally. If you're born gay, you shouldn't be treated worse than those who are born straight, I would say. And if we think that actually with Gaga that people are born this way, that's culture, then that means if you're born gay, you have every bit as much a right to marry as born straight. And that's what Margaret Marshall says. Margaret Marshall, Chief Justice Marshall, a Yale Law School graduate, by the way, in the Massachusetts Supreme Court in a case called Goodrich. I can't remember, I think it's 2003. So the same words that came from the 1780 Constitutional Convention presided over by John Adams, all men are born free and equal, ends slavery in 1780 and affirm and will lead to same-sex marriage in the 2000s. The very same words, the same birth equality idea. Now, you asked me specific about transgender individuals. I have a free column, my brother and I, on a website called SCOTUS blog. We have a 5-part series on the Skermeti case from last term about transgender issues. We've posted the first 4 of those 5. We still have yet to post the 5th. But if you want to see more about the complexity of the birth equality idea as applied to transgender issues, check out SCOTUS blog.
Thanks, EM. And yeah, please, let's keep them going. We got a good line here, so let's try to move through some questions.
Hi, my name is Jacob. My question for you is, how can we foster equality in a nation where one of its values is liberty, which is inherently unequal?
Oh, I don't know if liberty is inherently unequal. You might think that a synthesis is equal liberty, and there are all sorts of forms of equality. Equality of outcome is very different. Yeah, there are going to be unequal outcomes because we all enter a fair competition and some of us win and some of us lose. So we have to think about what kind of equality we have in mind. I'm telling you it's birth equality. And so we don't give people extra plus points because or minus points because they're born this way or that way.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jacob.
Hello, my name is Kai. I had a question. I know, Professor Amar, you're a self-prescribed liberal originalist, and you talked a lot about the importance of the Declaration. I would ask you, how do you go about interpreting the Declaration as opposed to the Constitution? And do you think it has significance in law the same way the Constitution does?
I do. I talk about the status of the Declaration in Chapter 6 of a book I wrote called America's Unwritten Constitution. There is the written Constitution, but then there are other sources of legal illumination: the Gettysburg Address, the Declaration of Independence, the I Have a Dream speech, the Federalist Papers. So I do think it is a source of legal insight. The Constitution says not all the rights are enumerated, so where they're not all listed, where might we find additional rights? Among other places in the Declaration of Independence. By the way, this is a theme discussed in a podcast. I have a free weekly podcast. It's utterly free. Earlier today here in Portland, I recorded the 250th episode. We've done it for 5 years, and we talk about 250 episodes and 250 years of American history, because we're on the cusp of the 250th anniversary of the Declaration, and I talk about some of these things on the podcast. For example, there's a provision of the Declaration that talks about quartering troops. It's talking about actually quartering troops in urban areas. That would never happen today, would it? Well, no, maybe it would, you see. And so you need to know the Declaration as well as the Constitution. So you might want to listen to that episode. You also might want to check out another free resource. How many of you have heard of the National Constitution Center? It's in Philly. How many of you have been there? Okay, it's on the other side of the continent. Go if you can, but even if you can't, how many of you have used the websites that it has created? The latest website is called the Annotated Declaration of Independence, and you can go through the whole Declaration and click on any paragraph, and it'll tell you more about what that paragraph was all about, what they were referring to, and how that paragraph is played out later in the American Constitution. I authored that text with my student, Sam Desai. So if you want more on the Declaration, check out this free resource, National Constitution Center Annotated Declaration.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kai. Good to see you, too.
Hi, my name is Augustus, and I would just you mentioned that a lot of the things that Howard Zinn didn't tell you, but I agree, he didn't tell you a lot, but couldn't, of course I'm speaking broadly when I say this, but couldn't a lot of the things that Howard Zinn say coexist with the greatness of America? Because I believe that they could, and I believe that they are. I believe that many of the things he says are accurate, and I also believe that America is great.
I'm glad you do believe America is great. I tend to think that his errors are all skewed. They're not. I want my epitaph to read his errors were symmetric. They're on both sides. And I think his errors tend to be, in general, what he doesn't tell you and what he does tell you that's very misleading tend to be all against American greatness. That's my reading of Zinn. Other people might have a different reading of Zinn.
Thanks.
Matt Damon is on your side.
Hi, my name is Ian. I wanted to ask a question about income inequality, because that's a big issue today. And even though we may all be born the same legally when it comes to race and gender, debatably, those with more wealth can buy better schooling, travel more, better universities, better healthcare. How do we contend with that as a society?
Thanks.
That's one of the big issues of your generation. And that's why and I don't have a 30-second answer, but I think you're asking, my friend, just the right question. Even if formally everyone is born equal, inequality seems to set in very early in life. I can tell you what Lincoln did, among other things. Can I borrow the book for a second? Lincoln championed an idea of public education, land-grant universities, so that people who were born on the bottom like him would have more of a fair chance. Let me actually just read to you, what he says about this very quickly, because I know we only have so much time. But Abraham Lincoln, one of the things that Abraham Lincoln very much believes in is public education, he's going to, as president, have the Moral Land Grant Act that takes America's Western resources and uses them to give low-born people a chance. So here's the most expansive interpretation of all men are created equal. All men should have something like an equal chance, all men and women, something like an equal chance in life. And government should help offset artificial and unfair inequalities. Okay, so here's what he says actually in one of his addresses. This is on July 4th, note the date, 1861. America must maintain in the world that form and substance of government whose leading object is to elevate the condition of men, to lift artificial weights from all shoulders, to clear the paths of laudable pursuit for all, to afford to all an unfettered start and a fair chance in the race of life. This is the leading object of the government for whose existence we contend. Now, here's what he says at Independence Hall as president-elect a few months earlier. In due time, the weights should be lifted from the shoulders of all men, and all should have an equal chance. This is the sentiment embodied in that Declaration of Independence, and I think he cashes that out, especially with the Homestead Act, offering land to the West. We don't sell it to the highest bidder, and the Moral Land Grant Act. And these things are actually open to people of all races, and they're designed to even up some of the unfair equalities in life.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for the good big question, too. Maybe after this question, Ben, if there are any coming in from any of the other places that we want to share.
Hi, I'm Isabel. My question is about voting rights. From what I've learned, in the beginning of the country, there were a lot more restrictions on voting rights, stuff like property or like the Electoral College, and the reason, or at least the justification, was that they wanted voters to be smart, and they wanted to avoid stuff like demagoguery or tyranny of the majority. Do you think that the expansion of suffrage has enabled those things more?
So you're absolutely right, but let me tell you, for example, and I Augustus, I'm going to go back to you because, I'm going to relitigate Zinn. Okay, here's what Zinn doesn't tell you. He doesn't, and it's huge. In 8 of the 13 states that actually vote on the Constitution, ordinary property qualifications that ordinarily apply don't apply to the special election on whether to have a Constitution. Here are the rules in New York. Not ordinarily, but in adopting the Constitution, all adult free male citizens get to vote. So in that election, no property qualifications, no literacy tests, no religious tests, no race tests. Those weren't the ordinary rules, but they were the rules for the Constitution itself. And wow, and that seems important, and Zinn doesn't tell you that. There were property qualifications in many places at the founding and other restrictions. Many of them fell away for white men during the era of Jacksonian America. At the same time, actually, restrictions were raised for blacks, and that's why you're going to need the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which promise race equality. Oh, and then I'm going to tell you in this book that those promises weren't kept for the longest time, which is why I want you to be originalists like Martin Luther King, who says, let's keep the promises that were actually made. So you're absolutely right. Voting rights in America have ebbed and flowed, and all sorts of ideas have emerged and been put in practice to restrict them. Over the long run, though, more people have been allowed to vote. And if you look at the Constitution, and not just American history, the Constitution, again and again and again in its amendments, adds to voting rights. It doesn't take away from voting rights. Voting rights are not mentioned. The right to vote is not mentioned in the founding document because of slavery and other things. But 5 times in your amended Constitution, the words "the right to vote" appear, and they appear in the first instance right after Lincoln. In the 14th Amendment, Section 2, in the 15th Amendment, in the 19th Amendment, in the 24th Amendment, and in the 26th Amendment. So if you look at the amendments and you pay attention to what the Constitution actually says, you see the forward march of voting rights. But you're absolutely right. In actual practice, voting rights have ebbed and flowed. That said, America, even at the founding, had vastly more political participation than, let's say, England. England, even after the reforms of 1833, maybe 1 in 6 males votes in England after 1833 reforms. In America, at the founding, if we're talking about among white people, from the beginning, it's more than 7 in 10, 70% of white males are voting.
Thank you.
Because a lot more people have property. Property is more widely distributed.
A quick question from a high schooler in LeGrand. Are you in any documentaries that I can watch?
Ken Burns has one coming out, but my phone didn't ring. I am, Netflix is doing something very soon, and they actually just reached out to me today saying we're going to put you on film. There's a 4-part series that some of you may have seen. I don't know if you call it a documentary. It's called Constitution USA with my friend Peter Sagal. So I'm in those episodes. I'm described as, I think there's this fun line at the beginning, if the Constitution is the Force, Akhil Amar is Yoda. So I thought that was kind of cool. But I'm on some of these, yeah. But hey, if any of you knows a great documentary filmmaker, give him my name.
Another question, this from Nora Jones, a sophomore at Willamette University. Your mention of singing the Song of America resonates with words and lyrics promulgated by Lin-Manuel Miranda's take on Hamilton's life. Do you think that the lyrics, "I'm just like my country, I'm young, scrappy, and hungry," is a good way to frame this idea?
I think Lynn is a genius. By the way, on documentaries, just to remind you, I have a free weekly podcast, and now we have video for that. It began initially as an audio podcast, but The Words That Made Us, Volume 1 of this trilogy, is dedicated to Lin Miranda and his spouse, Vanessa Nadal, and Ron Chernow, the author of a big fat book, like this big fat book, on Hamilton, and Kaiser Khan and Neil Katyal. So I think Lin is a genius. I think he's riffing on a book by Hamilton that's a genius book by Ron Chernow. I think Hamilton himself was a genius. So Hamilton genius, Chernow genius, Miranda genius, genius on genius on genius. I'm a huge fanboy of Lin Miranda's, and I think he's made Hamilton and the Constitution actually more interesting and accessible to an entire generation. He's used black music to tell and black and non-white actors to tell a fundamentally white story, an inclusive story about someone who is low-born. How does an orphan, a bastard orphan, son of a, so that's a low-born person who rises to meteoric heights. And in New York, you can be your own man. You can remake yourself. So I think he's capturing some very deep truths about the man Hamilton, about the founding era, about the greatness of America. I'm a huge fan of his. I wish he would run for president.
So we probably have time for just a couple more questions while we're still formally doing this, and I apologize to everyone that's waiting here, but maybe hang out there because once we close, maybe we'll have time to help Akhil miss his plane.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Marie, and one of your main focuses in your book was Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and I just wondered what your thought process was including her in a book that focuses on equality at birth, especially when she has many racist ideals, like educated women were more qualified to vote than black men, and how she sometimes excluded black women from her suffrage movement.
I promise you will see all of that in the book. People are imperfect. I don't hide stuff. Howard Zinn doesn't tell you all sorts of stuff. My errors are symmetric. So you're going to be impressed that both on what she does, and I'm also going to show you where she most disappoints.
Thanks. And maybe we'll I'm sorry to do this, but we might call this the last question from the mic, and then we'll close and hope to do some chatting with all the lights on.
Hello, my name is Wolf. You mentioned earlier how like a lot of equality can come from war, how like war can bring out a lot of equality from like lower statuses. And I think as many of us know, there was a lot of inequality and division in pre-Civil War America. Do you think that the conditions today are ripe again for a second Civil War? And if so, do you think it'll be different?
It's a heck of a
No,
last question.
I don't think we're yet on the verge of a civil war, in part because we don't geographically divide in quite the same way overwhelmingly. Yes, there's red America and blue America, but Abraham Lincoln gets 0 popular votes south of Virginia. Okay, so and the coalition that was opposed to Lincoln was geographically contiguous. Actually, our coalitions aren't quite geographically contiguous. And to repeat, we don't have the exact same kind of geographic polarization. That said, we have to come together as Americans. And the way we do that, I believe, is having a common historical narrative that's neither left nor right, but simply comprehensive and true. And that's what I'm trying to provide in these books, is something that a conservative could read and a liberal could read, and they say, yeah, that's basically, he's got the key, he's identified the key facts, and there is American greatness, and there's also stuff still left to do because we have fallen short in so many ways.
Great, thank you so much.
So, thanks for the question. First of all, as we truncate questions, for which, again, I apologize, I will say, as Akhil has pointed out, there are multiple books, podcasts, and lots of opportunities to engage with Akhil's thought. And it is all accessible and deeply researched. And so I just want to, I guess, echo what I heard Akhil say to a few of the high school students who were asking him to sign their book early, which was, the deal is, if I sign it, you read it. Which I thought was a nice challenge, and there's a lot out there to read and listen to. I also want to say, for those in Oregon, that the 250th is upon us, the 250th anniversary, and I know many organizations are thinking about it. And for Oregon Humanities, we're going to be running a lot of community conversations around questions like what we want from this ideal of equality. And so there's a program called the Conversation Project, and it's where we really, there's no stage at the Conversation Project. So we try to do different kinds of programs, and we try to create space for people to talk to each other. I hope your schools, libraries, municipal agencies will look into bringing those conversations to your community in LeGrand, Clatskanie, Salem, Portland, wherever you are. I want to say again a huge thank you to everyone who came out tonight and who joined us online, especially the students and teachers who got here this evening really early and are making quite a night of it. And so a thank you, and please join me in saying a huge thank you to Akhil Reed Amar.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, let me just check with